And we spent, a third of the money getting the
Wow.
second space going because it was a second generation space. And it did double the revenue of the first space.
How did you transition from being associate to starting your own?
Okay. Yeah, we were an associate in that group, and I worked full time for them. And after a while, my co-founder and my husband was also an associate for that group. He had graduated 2 years before me, and they had asked him, after a couple months of me joining them, to go and open one of their de novo offices. So they moved them to open a whole de novo office, and he went that way. And I said, "Wow, this sounds like fun. I want to open a de novo office." And they're like, "Well, he's out of dental school 3 years. You're just out of dental school 6 months. We can't have you open a de novo office. You need to stay here and learn how to do dentistry." And they were right. So another group in town, which was a really large DSO at the time, like one of the only DSOs that served the Medicaid population, asked me, "Hey, do you want to open a de novo for us?" And I'm like, "Well, yeah, I mean, somebody has to ask me for this." So I opened one for them, and then another one, then another one, then another one. And I was like, "Oh, well, this sounds like something I can do. Why don't I open one for myself?" And so that's when our first one started.
Wow, that's great. And what city was this in?
The first one was in West Bloomfield, Michigan. And then the second one was in Brighton, Michigan. So the first one we opened, it was, back in 2002, end of 2002, like basically beginning of 2003. And it was the time where there was, digital radiography and, digital EMR systems weren't a thing. And we put all the bells and whistles, everything was digital. And, that office was the talk of town because everybody else had little, x-rays, like paper x-rays. And they still had like appointments written by hand and charting done by hand, and everything was done digitally. It was a digital office. So that office took off and it did pretty well. Then an opportunity presented itself because the DSO that I was hired to open offices for moved one of their locations. So one of their suites came empty. So it was a second generation dental space. And we were like, okay, you know what? The investment into our first space was almost $500,000 because between
And back then,
the TI, yeah, it was expensive.
yeah.
We said, okay, the investment into the second space, we're going to save like a couple $100,000 in just TI. Let's just go for it, and they were done a year apart, right? We're like, let's just go for the second space and make it the same way and see what happens. And we spent, a third of the money getting the second space going because it was a second generation space. And it did double the revenue of the first space because it was more outside of the main town. It was a little bit more of a rural community, even though it wasn't rural, but it was compared to the first